All right, let's talk about the different economic sectors, the different fields of the economy. Starting with the primary sector. The primary sector of the economy deals with natural resources and extracting the raw materials. So things like fishing and farming and forestry and mining, you're taking natural resources, food, animals, ores and diamonds. That's part of mining. That's my best explanation for mining. I don't really know. Forestry, you take trees, you take leaves. All that stuff comes from the natural world, and that's what primary sector deals with. It takes with extracting the raw materials. The secondary sector is where you use these raw materials in manufacturing and processing, aka factory work, and this took off during the Industrial Revolution. And the key characteristic between secondary sector industries like processing food, steel making, glass making, building cars, assembling electronics, the textile industry. The similarity between all of those is that you're turning raw materials into immediate goods that I can use, like a window or a car or this iPad that I have beside me, or the laptop I'm using to record this video, the smartboard in your classroom. Now, the tertiary sector, this is the big one today, is the service industry. You're not extracting the raw materials. I'm not fishing, but I'm not manufacturing anything. I am not putting peaches in a can. That's the best example I can think of manufacturing, is processing canned fruit. Wow, I'm doing really good this morning. But the tertiary industry deals with services. So me actually selling the canned peaches, that's part of the service industry. So things like babysitting. I'm not providing a chair to sit on a baby. I'm also not providing the baby. The service industry, I'm providing an action, a service. A cashier at the Krusty Krab Squidward is not providing any good and service. He is just merely facilitating a transaction. And the same thing with banking as well. That's a tertiary industry. And look at this little diagram here on the bottom left. The tertiary sector is kind of split up into the quaternary and quinary industries. Let's talk about those a little bit. Not every tertiary economy job is in this quaternary, quinary sector, but we can best classify them because the tertiary industry is really big. It's a big sector. So the quaternary industry deals with knowledge. It deals with smart people and information. So things like the media and journalism, where I'm going out and interviewing people and acquiring information and sharing it with other people. Also doing research, scientific research, for instance, becoming a scientist and finding a new element. That is quaternary industries. Also teaching, educators are part of the quaternary sector because they're using information and they're building the knowledge of the youth, as well as consulting and that sort of thing. That's a quaternary industry. So it's the knowledge sector. Some other industries we like financial planning and IT as well. All of those are in the quaternary industry. But the quinary industry, one step further, is human services in decision making. I am using my brain to make decisions based on the information that I already have. So things like political officials, like our president of the United States is in the quinary sector. CEOs of companies, legal services, HR, we all love HR. They are all part of the quinary sector as well. So these are our 5 economic sectors. I would think that the distinguishing characteristics are canny and very visible to y'all. But we're going to talk about these a little bit more and see how they kind of apply to the real world and economies over time. So let's look at some developmental patterns. As economies first emerged, the Neolithic Revolution, they were first primary based. They were agriculture based. They focused on farming and natural resources. As technologies developed and urbanization grew, so moving up to the Industrial Revolution, less employers were needed to work in agriculture and the other areas of the primary sector. Thus, they searched for jobs in the secondary sector. And this really took off during the Industrial Revolution. People moved to these cities and the cities grew because that's where the factories were. Industrialization increased employment. It also decreased the price of goods because they can produce more goods more quickly, and also increased spendable income because people had income to spend on these new goods that were more affordable to them. They also had jobs because it increased employment, and jobs give you income. There's heightened demand for services, though, because they want to spend the money on some other stuff. They have time for recreation or entertainment. They also might have health problems because those cities were full of air pollution because factories were not kind to the lungs. They also go get education, and this led to the emergence of the tertiary sector. And over time, the tertiary sector continued to rise because there's more demand for these services because countries continued to develop their manufacturing. More people got jobs, more people got incomes, prices of goods kept going down, more goods were being released, more goods were being traded and coming across different countries. A lot of things were happening. And the tertiary sector today is the largest and fastest growing sector in the Western world. Over 50% of the modern world is in the tertiary sector, so majority. Machines took over tasks previously done by humans in factories. So not only have they done that in agriculture, but now they're doing it in the secondary sector. And so people are moving for jobs to the tertiary sector. So they're going from the secondary to the tertiary sector because they still need incomes. They still want employment opportunities. We call this deindustrialization. We've seen increases in, of course, electronics and technology, lots of developments in cybersecurity and AI. We see developments in digital media. We see online freelancers and influencers, software development, data science. All of these industries have really emerged and developed drastically in the last 50 years. They didn't exist 50 years ago. Now they do. And we also buy stuff online with different markets like Amazon, eBay, Walmart Pickup, Uber Eats, Grubhub, Uber, Lyft. All of those things exist because of technology and the internet. And it's expanded the market access to businesses, but it's also expanded our access as consumers to new and different goods and services. So these are the trends that we've seen in economies across the world as time goes on. And we're pretty up to date with this. So let's talk about a macroeconomic theory that sounds intense because it is. It's called the least cost theory. We know the goal of businesses is to make as much money as possible, and they do this by spending as little money as possible. They maximize sales and maximize efficiency, but they also maximize production to produce the good that they're going to sell for money. And we look at the least cost theory developed by a famous Alfred Weber. I'm sure you've heard of him. He proposes the most optimal location for a manufacturing plant, aka a factory, to minimize production and transportation costs. He considers factors like transportation costs and labor costs and agglomeration. Transportation costs, I mean, how much money does it take to ship books as it does to drumsticks? There's a lot that goes into that. And that's actually what we're going to look on the most is transportation costs. We also look at labor costs. Certain countries have different minimum wages, so it may be more efficient to build a factory in a country with workers that you have to pay less because it saves you money. Also look at skilled and unskilled labor. Skilled labor is going to be more expensive because they have education and they think their value as laborers is worth more. And we also have agglomeration, which is a fancy word. It's a long word because it's a fancy and confusing concept that we'll talk about later on in the course. And agglomeration, for your sake today, is how can businesses be located close together to utilize the same resources like transportation in order to minimize their costs as a whole. Yeah, I told you, it's intense. But the least cost theory is not perfect, as other theories in this course, and it does not consider supranationalism, trade agreements, and online markets and products. It does not know that the EU exists. It does not know we have free trade agreements. It also does not know that Amazon and eBay and other things on the internet exist and are potential markets. It only considers physical markets. So let's move on to these transportation costs a little bit more and talk about bulk gaining and bulk reducing industries. Yes, we're talking about lifting weights. Bulk gaining industries. The final product ends up becoming larger and heavier than its raw materials. So beverages, for one, you start out with the bottle or the syrup, and then you add stuff to it. Obviously, it's going to get heavier. Water is very heavy. But if you look at metal products, so things like cars, toasters, those are all bulk gaining industries. Food as well, so canned peaches, that's a bulk gaining industry. You start out with a peach, then you put it in a can. Now it's heavier. Who would have thought? Also electronics, so your TV, this laptop that I'm filming on, I have my tablet, my phone. Those things are all going to be bulk gaining industries. The silicon that's extracted out of the ground that's used to make my processing chip, that's used to make my laptop, the laptop's obviously a lot heavier than those individual products. So that makes it a bulk gaining industry. Now, what does this mean in terms of the least cost theory? What it means is that it's optimal to place the factory closer to the markets. That way you minimize the transportation time, and overall you minimize the transportation costs. Now, the opposite of a bulk gaining industry is a bulk reducing industry. And that's when you take raw materials that are larger and heavier than the final and finished product. So these are things like heavy metals, steel and copper, lumber mills, the tree is obviously going to be heavier than the final wood that you take from the tree. There's leaves, and you don't take the entire tree when you make lumber. You also have anything that involves petroleum, so gas, diesels, other fuels, and energy. All of these are bulk reducing industries. Things you have to purify or filter, those are all going to be bulk reducing industries. And that makes it optimal to place factories closer to the raw materials. That way you minimize the transportation time and the transportation costs for these raw materials that are larger and heavier. It's okay because the final product is going to be weighs a lot less. So it can take a little longer for transportation to get them to the market because it's going to be cheaper. Now let's look at some examples of this. Coca-Cola. You see these bottles here? They don't weigh as much as the bottles with the soda in it. Who would have thought? Water is heavy and it's the primary ingredient to any beverage. And Coca-Cola, a globalized company, has around 950 production facilities spread across over 100 countries in every continent. And that's really good because Coca-Cola is a bulk gaining industry. Each production facility can deliver the finished beverages to the closest region here. And so they locate their factories, their production facilities close to the markets. And since they have a worldwide market, they have to have production facilities across the entire world. Otherwise, it'd just be really expensive. Now, moving on to steel, which is not a bulk gaining industry, it's a bulk reducing industry. Steel manufacturing inputs are iron ore and coal. These are pretty heavy. Steel making, which is a secondary sector industry, involves removing impurities from the ore. You're taking out weight. You're also making it smaller by reducing the volume. Processing 1 ton of steel results really in about 70% of that. So 0.7 tons of pure steel. You're actually not processing 1 ton of steel. You're processing 1 ton of iron ore. So you take a ton of iron ore and you have a little less steel. So it's obviously being reduced. It's best to minimize transportation costs by locating it near the extraction sites of these heavy resources because it's harder to move heavy things than lighter things. Try moving 100 bricks compared to 100 feathers. Now, let's talk about this concept known as a break of bulk point. It's a physical location where goods, really just cargo these days, are transferred from one form of transportation to another. So they can go from port to port, airport to railroad, something like that. And so common break of bulk points are ports, airports, and rail stations. Airports and ports really are the most prominent break of bulk points today. I like saying break of bulk point. It's really fun to say. The Port of Shanghai in China is the busiest port in the world. It's a common break of bulk points. It has 125 docks and 25,000 ships. Look how big these ships are and how much cargo is on these ships. 25,000 ships pass through them annually, which is pretty insane. And break of bulk points like the Port of Shanghai involves handling, storage, as well as customs of cargo. And customs, we're looking at tariffs and taxes and all that fun stuff. Border crossings between countries like the one between the United States and Mexico. We also look at major rail terminals. All of these serve as key points as break of bulk points. They transfer goods from one mode of transport to another, or for the customs clearance in countries that have customs duties or tariffs. And what you really see here with break of bulk points is that you minimize them for heavy materials because they're heavy. You want to not move them over to different transportation because it's hard to do that. They're heavy. Bulk gaining industries prefer to have factory locations near markets, so break of bulk points are used to distribute inputs of these goods. Good to know. All right, shipping containers. These are kind of the key factor to transportation of goods and cargo these days. They're durable, they're affordable for storage facilities, but you can also use them for transportation. We have the IOS, the International Organization for Standardization, and that's established standards for container dimensions, weight, and other areas to ensure that they are compatible at break of bulk points. You can move a cargo from a boat to an airplane or to a truck, and it'll fit because they all look the same and they have the same dimensions like you can see here in this image. Containers are easily transported to different modes of transportation as a result. We also see automation and technology to transport these containers instead of humans picking them up and moving the goods individually or just picking up the cargo because that would be also heavy. We've talked about heavy things a lot in this course. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really does help me out, and it costs $0. I have some free resources for you in the description down below if you'd like to use them. If you have any AP Human Geography related questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to leave a comment down below the video or send me a message on Discord. I'll see you guys in the next video, though. Adios.